Ito ang inyong lingkod na nagbabalik upang magbigay ng mga balitang walang bias at pawang katotohanan lamang. Ito ang Bayang Pinas. Ngunit bagong lahat, kung bago ka pa lamang sa ating channel ay syempre huwag mong kakalimutan na mag-subscribe muna, pindutin ang notification bell at piliin ang all upang lagi kang maging updated sa ating mga bagong videos na ina-upload araw-araw. At syempre, maraming salamat na rin po sa ating mga solid viewers sa walang sawang pagsuporta. Huwag na huwag rin din pong kakalimutang mag-iwan ng like at i-share ang ating mga videos upang maging aware din ng ibang tao sa kung anong nangyayari sa ating bansa. At kung mayroon ka naman pong opinion or di kaya hinaing, ang ating comment section po ay bukas para sa inyong mga saloobin. Laging tandaan, bilang residente ng bansang Pilipinas, ang ating opinion ay dapat marinig at mapakinggan. Ito na nga mga kaibigan, atin nang panoorin ang kabuuan ng video.
Ang gagago ng Kongreso at Senado sa atin. Isipin nyo to mga boss ha, ziniro yung budget sa PhilHealth. Sabi kasi ni Senadora Grace po ng Senate Committee on Finance, kailangan daw kasi pondohan yung ibang proyekto at programa ng gobyerno. Wala naman sanang problema yan eh. Ganyan naman talaga ang realidad ng pagbabudget. Pero putang ina nyo naman mga senador at mga congressman, lalong-lalo ka na Martin Romualdez. Ziniro nyo yung budget ng PhilHealth para pondohan kuno yung ibang mga proyekto at programa. Tapos mababalitaan namin, nilagay nyo, binalik nyo yung 26 billion pesos na pondo ng Akap. Alam naman naming lahat na gagamitin nyo yung ayuda para sa Kaposang Kita program para sa 2025 elections. Sige nga, sino ang may access at sino ang may say sa pamimigay ng Akap program? Di ba mga congressman? Di ba mga senador? Kaya nga 21 billion yung nilagay nyo sa Kongreso, tapos 5 billion sa Senado. Tanungin namin kayo mga congressman tsaka mga senador, mas mahalaga yung Akap kaysa sa kalusugan ng mamamayang Pilipino, lalong-lalo na ng mga manggagawa na buwan-buwan nagbibigay ng kontribusyon para sa PhilHealth. Nakita nyo na ba ano itsura ng mga public hospital? Nakita nyo na ba gaano karami yung mga pasyente na pumipila dyan araw-araw? Alam nyo ba kung gaano kalimitado yung mga serbisyo na na-access ng mga pasyente dyan sa PhilHealth? Baka nga di nyo alam yan eh. Sure kami, hindi nyo alam yan. Kaya nga yan ang ginawa nyo. Prioritize nyo yung proyekto nyo kaysa ponduhan yung PhilHealth. Tapos ano nga asahan namin pag nagkandaletse-letse yung kalusugan namin? Guarantee letter mula sa mga opisina nyo? Kayo na naman yung superhero? Kayo na naman yung mababait? Putang ina nyo pala eh. Gusto nyo na naman na magkaroon kami ng utang na loob sa inyo. Mga boss, ito yung issue na dapat nangingialam at nagsasalita na tayong lahat. Buhay at kamatayan, nating ordinaryong Pilipino, nating mga manggagawang pinag-uusapan dito. Huwag tayong pumayag, nagaguhin ng mga congressman tsaka ng mga senador, ni na Martin Romualdez, ni na Grace po, at lahat ng kabilang dyan sa BICAM Committee. Singilin natin yung mga yan, kalampagin natin yung mga yan, lalong-lalo na karamihan sa mga senador at congressman na yan, nagpapabango kasi tatakbo uli yan sa 2025. Ibalik nyo ang pondo ng PhilHealth, huwag nyong nakawin ang pera namin.
I'm just pointing out the fiscal space that Congress has freed up under programmed appropriations. Yun po, that's what I'm pointing out. And bago malimutan, we also freed up 74 billion pesos, 74.4 billion pesos sa PhilHealth subsidy. Tama po yun, which is under programmed appropriations. Tama po?
Yes, Mr. President.
Why did we have to do that, Mr. President? Sa dami na ng... hindi pa tayo makakame up ng total amount of the fiscal space which we have freed up sa programmed appropriations because hindi natin alam yung how much of the 373 billion of new items under unprogrammed appropriations came from program. Hindi pa natin alam eh. But we will add to that the MPBF, we add to that the PGF na mga freed amounts, plus the 74 of the PhilHealth. Kinailangan pa ba natin na i-zero talaga si PhilHealth to free up 74 billion pesos, Mr. President?
I know, Mr. President, that's also the question of many. And I've thought about this long and hard. And there's no denying that PhilHealth has a savings amount of 600 billion, Mr. President. And that's also the reason why initially the administration thought of it as a way also to augment certain short fundings that we had, for example, for health workers, etc. Hindi natin maintindihan ba't hindi nila ginagamit yung pera na nandun na meron sila na nakaimbak sa isang, ewan ko kung anong klaseng account yan, savings account, na ang kinikita ay mas mababa pa kesa sa inflation. Mr. President, hindi pwedeng sisihin na nagkulang tayo sa pagbibigay sa kanila. Kasi nga ang dami ngang pera na nandyan. Hindi nila pinamimigay ang pera dun sa mga nangangailangan at tinuturuan din natin sila ng leksyon. Kung bigay ka ng bigay, nandun lang yung pera, hindi naman nagagamit. Paano naman yung mga ibang programa rin ng gobyerno na nangangailangan din ng funding? Yun nga yung sinasabi ko, pag meron kang, syempre, di ba, sinasabi natin, 5 yung anak mo, lahat yan kailangan pantay-pantay na mabigyan mo. Totoo yun. Pero sa lahat sa kanila, tinitignan mo rin kung sino may pangangailangan at sino naman ang may kakayanan na itayo rin ang kanyang sarili. Yun din ang sinasabi natin, it's a leadership problem also in PhilHealth and it's a disbursement problem. Gaya nga ng sinabi ni Senator Cynthia, ang problema din sa PhilHealth, hindi na natin alam kung ano ba talaga yung mga benepisyo natin. Wala tayong card na nagsasabi hanggang dito o ganyan ang maibibigay sa'yo, ang tagal-tagal ng approval minsan, hindi alam ng ating mga kababayan kung paano sila comply dun sa mga requirements. So ito yung mga nagiging issue. Hindi sila kulang sa pera. At alam ko yung iba talagang pinagdidiinan nito. Pero 600 billion ang meron sila. Samantalang ang dami natin din pangangailangan pagdating sa edukasyon, pagdating sa infrastruktura. Alam mo, maganda talagang magbigay ng social protection, wealth transfer. Importante yan. Pero kailangan din natin ng wealth generating initiatives kasi hindi natin mapopondohan ang mga ibang bagay na magbibigay ng suporta sa ating mga kababayan kung ang gobyerno ay walang programa na magpapalago ng ating ekonomiya.
I'm reminded of the saying that health is wealth. But I don't think, Mr. President, that we can use funds meant for health so that we will justify that we will generate wealth for the nation.
Mr. President,
so,
the budget of the DOH has increased from last year.
DOH.
So it may not have been an item, for example, in particular for PhilHealth. Pero meron naman pong increase na nangyari dito sa DOH from 241 billion 602 in 2024, yung BICAM natin nasa 247 923. So we are, of course, health is wealth. That's very important. But also health, the financial situation of our country, the economy, and wealth-generating initiatives are important so that we can support social protection initiatives such as the health sector.
Sige, mag-digress po tayo muna sa health sector. Pero napansin ko po na ang ating final amount sa Department of Health is 247.9 billion pesos sa BICAM report. Mas mababa by 25.7 billion pesos from the gap, 273.7 billion pesos. So, binawasan pa rin natin ang DOH. And then, ang ating pampalubag-loob lang ay yung level, nung binawasan na, yung ending amount is still higher than the 2024 GAE amount.
Yes, Mr. President.
But why did we reduce it, Mr. President, by 25.7 billion pesos? Which is a very significant amount also, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, there are certain agencies that we also supported. Like, for example, the Department of Agrarian Reform. We had given them an increase for their budget. We also had given the state universities and colleges an increase in their budget. The DICT, we've also given them an increase. The Department of National Defense also has an increase. So, Mr. President, if possible, we would like to increase all, but then also because of the substantial budget allocation of other departments, we also made sure that departments that are also crucial have a respectable amount that they can operate with.
So, pwede ba nating masabi na itong 74.4 billion pesos ng PhilHealth na ziniro natin ay binigay sa ibang mga ahensya ng gobyerno na sa tingin natin ng ating committee na mas nangangailangan o mas deserving ng amount, at masasabi ba natin na hindi directly health-related yung napuntahan ng 74.4 billion pesos na yon, Mr. President?
Mr. President, hindi isa masasabi nating more deserving, more in need, perhaps.
Yes.
And then also, yes, I think I know where your next question will lead to. But yes, I think transparently you can look that if you look at the increase in some appropriations, they're not health-related.
Yes, they're not health-related. Ngayon, Mr. President, ang problema kasi yung timing din ng pagbaba natin eh. We want to teach them a lesson, pero 74.4 billion pesos tatanggalin natin, isi-zero natin. Pero hindi ba natin alam na pinasa natin dito sa chamber natin yung panukala na pababain ang premium rates. Nababa natin eh. At the same time, inutusan natin sila to increase their compensation packages, which ginawa nila. Tapos hindi lang dagdagan pa, may konsulta, etc. So, ang nangyayari po, Mr. President, we are being conservative with PhilHealth by reducing the subsidy by 74.4 billion pesos at a time when when PhilHealth has now committed to be more proactive, aggressive, and then we are returning some benefits to the direct contributors by lowering the contribution rate, Mr. President. Ganyan na nangyari. So, parang hindi makatuwiran yung makatuwiran yung 74.4 billion pesos reduction, wrong timing pa. Now that kung ano yung itinuturo natin sa PhilHealth, pinapressure natin sila, gagawin na nila, tapos ngayon parang pipilayan natin sila para magawa nila yung sinasabi natin gawin nila, Mr. President.
Mr. President, unang-una, hindi ako naniniwala na mapipilayan sila. Kasi nga may pagkukunan pa rin silang 600 bilyon. So sabihin na natin, 70 billion ang hindi na nalaan sa kanila ngayon sa budget. Meron naman silang pagkukunan na 600 bilyon. Ngayon, sa susunod na taon, kung talagang tinupad nila ang kanilang pangako na number one, mas iigihan nila ang pagbigay ng suporta sa mga may sakit na nangangailangan. Pangalawa, na-implement na yung batas. Ewan ko kung napasa na ba yung batas na yun na bababaan yung premium at hindi na dapat kasama sa batas yung pag-increase ng premium na yon. At saka natin masasabi na, sige, sa susunod na taon, 2026 budget, pwede na nating punuan muli sapagkat nagagamit na nila yung kanilang reserba.
Nakalimutan ko nga i-mention na pinush ko nga sila na magkaroon ng dental services at ngayon nababasa natin that they are also offering dental services, Mr. President.
Exactly, Mr. President. I think this can be evaluated. For example, you have a child who has committed something, you're teaching your child a lesson, hindi naman porket na nag-reform na kaagad, ay ibibigay mo na muli. Kailangan mo nang patunayan rin na masusustain ito. Magagawa niya talaga ng tuloy-tuloy. Kaya nga, dito, uulitin ko at alam ko marami rin ng magtataka dito. No? Pero 600 billion, may pera kang ganon. May mga ibang programa ng gobyerno na pwede ring pondohan. At hindi naman maghihirap ang PhilHealth dahil meron silang pagkukunan para bayaran. Ang problema nga nila noon, hindi nila ginagawa yon. Kaya ngayon, salamat sa inisyatibo nga, sinabi nga natin, yung ating minority leader, sinabi, dapat meron kayong dental benefits. O gagawin daw nila, o ginagawa na nila. O ngayon, may batas, pero hindi ko alam, parang hindi pa yata napapasa na hindi muna itataas ang premium. Di ba? Hindi pa yan batas. Di ba? Iamyanda pa lang natin yan. Hindi pa yan nangyayari. So sa ngayon, ang dami nagrereklamo na ang taas ng premium ng PhilHealth tumataas, pero ang benepisyo nila hindi pa rin ganyan. Kaya meron pa rin silang nakokolektang premium na mas mataas.
Unfortunately, I think when we apply the formula for what is to be remitted to PhilHealth under the UHCA, this is based on actual revenues or collections. So, wala pong reason na masabi natin it will be an unfunded mandate kasi if the collection is zero, percentage of zero is zero, pero may collection eh. So we have to, if the sponsor will allow me to read the provisions. No? Ano ba dapat ang binibigay sa PhilHealth? Utos ng Universal Healthcare Act. Revenues from excise tax on sugar-sweetened beverages. 50% of total revenue shall be allocated, may word pa na exclusively, to PhilHealth. 80% nito. 80% of the 50%. Tama? To PhilHealth. Okay. Revenues from excise tax on alcohol products. 50% of total revenue shall be allocated exclusively to PhilHealth, to the tune of 80% of that 50%. Revenues from excise tax on tobacco products. 50% of total excise tax collection from tobacco products shall be exclusively allocated to PhilHealth to the tune of 80% of that 50%. And then revenues from excise tax on heated tobacco products and vapor products, from the total revenues, PhilHealth must be given 80% for the implementation of the Universal Healthcare Act. And then, sa pagkakaintindi ko, ito na yon. That is why umabot tayo sa 74.43 billion sa net, because health insurance coverage under sin tax law amounting to 53.13 billion pesos to be used for health insurance premiums of indirect contributors. Plus, inad doon yung 21.17 billion pesos benefit package improvement under the Universal Healthcare Law, plus a smaller amount of 127.5 million pesos special purpose insurance, million lang po yun, 127.5 million pesos special purpose insurance coverage for the health insurance premiums of the beneficiaries under Pamana program. Pag isuma total lahat yun, yun yung 74.43 billion pesos na nasa NEP as subsidy to PhilHealth. Pero meron pa nagdi-dispute na hindi yan tama, di ba? Although I must hasten to add na meron pa nga nagdi-dispute dyan that if you properly apply the formula, it should even be a bigger amount than the 74.43 billion pesos. That's the point, Mr. President. And then na-zero na natin. And then, admittedly, ang destinasyon nung na-free up na 74.4 billion pesos, aminado tayong hindi sa directly health purposes, Mr. President. So that's what happened to PhilHealth, Mr. President. So, it's a different, this is my opinion, Mr. President. The subsidy for PhilHealth is in the nature of, is like an automatic appropriation because the law provides for the formula. Parang ministerial act na lang sa DBM to determine the amount under the formula and then give it as a subsidy. Minimum amount of subsidy kasi itong mga benefit packages, dagdag na po yan. Pero minimum amount of subsidy is determined by law. So when we are discussing general principles ng budget, when they mention automatic appropriations, ang instruction nila sa Congress, you cannot touch automatic appropriations because the appropriation is provided by law. So that's the point of this representation, Mr. President.
Mr. President, if I may, there are also other laws that specify that the government will automatically appropriate. But then the reality is, even if the government wanted to, it hasn't been able to appropriate, as I mentioned, more than 1 trillion pesos worth of funds that belong to, that should have funded certain laws that have been passed. So, Mr. President, I think we can argue about this all day. I understand the point of the minority leader. What I'm just saying is that with discretion also of the legislative body, we believe that the 600 billion of PhilHealth is for them to be able to utilize. They are not definitely destitute. They have the funding for it. And if they also show their capability to utilize those funds, next year, definitely it will be a different scenario once we evaluate the progress that they have made. Because we can go back and forth to this, and as the minority leader has said, that doesn't stop him from questioning this from another independent body, the judiciary, to clarify the matter.
Yes.
But we stand by the fact that the GA is also a law, looking at the snapshot of hopefully the next year and how we will be able to fund all our priority projects.
So, Mr. President, yun lang, I'm just pointing this out na we may be inviting another case before the Supreme Court because under the theory that the GAA, if we pass this, is amending indirectly the syntax law, Mr. President, the formula. Well, and then, Mr. President, para na rin po hindi humaba, can I just make of note my observations and then request in writing some further information about them, Mr. President? So, for example, we increased the Office of the President budget by 5.4 billion pesos. Ang tanong na lang siguro why, in writing na lang po. Kasi pwede naman nung sa plenary, pwede naman talagang nailabas na lang yun. Kung if they really need additional 5.
Mr. President, if may I clarify it, because I think it's for good reason. This was actually a request because all of a sudden, we have been chosen or we have been assigned to host the ASEAN summits. Dapat yan kasi Myanmar. For some reason, some delegates said na they're not comfortable because maybe of some political situation in Myanmar, and the next is the Philippines. So that's exactly the amount that is needed for the ASEAN. That is the only addition because when they did the NEP, wala pa yung designation sa atin.
Meaning to say that this 5.4 billion was reflected in the Senate committee report.
Yes, Mr. President.
So congratulations for that and thank you for pointing that out, Mr. President. Nasunod yung ating version.
Finally, no?
Yes, thank you. After the BICAM, the Senate's budget will be increased by 1.1 billion pesos and the House of Representatives budget will be increased by 17.3 billion pesos. So ang start ng Senate, 12.8 billion pesos plus 1.1 billion pesos. Ang budget natin is 13.9 billion pesos. Ang House of Representatives, ang starting amount nila 16.3 billion pesos, ang increase nila 17.3 billion pesos, ang ending budget nila 33.6 billion pesos. Ang aking lang basic point dito, Mr. President, kung ganito rin pala ang ending ng ang amounts, bakit hindi na lang linabas natin sa plenary at tiniskas? Bakit kailangan sa BICAM pa mangyayari ito, Mr. President, na halos lumampas pa sa doble ang budget ng isang chamber na bala ko sanang samahan na, salihan next year, Mr. President. But we have to be transparent with we have to be transparent about all of this, Mr. President. Na, di ba, if you need, okay, we'll use mathematical terms. If you need 2x instead of x, bakit hindi pa na-reflect yan doon sa original bill na final mo? Sana pinare-reflect mo na yung 33 billion pesos na pangangailangan mo. That's my point, Mr. President. So I'm not expecting an explanation from our chairwoman kasi hindi naman niya ito kagagawan. So for more transparency in our budget process sana, we will discuss it sa floor. And then is our Senate Secretary here? Medyo mabuti is not here because I will talk about him, Mr. President. Okay. But you should not take this personally. Okay, para lang for the information of our colleagues. During the budget season, I interpolated on the Senate's budget. Okay. So happy kayo for the first time nag-appear ang ating Senate Secretary to answer questions. Ano yan? A basic factual question. For the year 2024, yung 2 billion increase ng Senate budget, sa BICAM ba nangyari o hindi? Ang sagot sa akin, sa plenary natin ginawa, which I accepted. But upon further research, I was given a wrong answer. Sa BICAM din po nangyari yun. Just like what is happening now, we also increased the Senate's budget by 1.1 billion pesos. So, just to make that clear, Mr. President, no, na
Mr. President, actually, nung second and third reading, nandun na yung increase natin na 1.1
Dito, for this year, for 2025 po yan. I'm talking about when I was asking the Senate Secretary about the 2024 budget.
Wala pa ako noon, Mr.
Hindi po sa yan.
Kasi akala ko ako yung sinasabihan mo
Hindi po. That's why sabi ko nga, I'm talking about our Senate Secretary. So, just to be very, very transparent, no, sana po magbigay din tayo ng mga accurate na sagot, Mr. President. Because marami na rin tayong experience dito sa budget season. Sagot lang ng sagot para lang matapos na yung proseso. Alam mo, sometimes binobola ka lang nung mga iba. Pero well, anyway,
Hindi
Mr.
kita
President.
binobola, Mr. President.
No, that is one. That is some of our resource persons, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I would like to put on record that I do not totally agree with everything that's been proposed also by the House. Unfortunately, I'm also trying to safeguard certain key points that I feel that we are more passionate about and what we believe we should also be able to protect. As the Senate President has mentioned, this is not a zero-sum game. Unfortunately, we all have our wish lists. Their budget is much larger because they're a bigger house, I suppose. But then the reality is we have to, like for example, certain projects, we've added provisions to make sure that there is a repertorial process for us to be able to monitor and audit whatever funding we have placed in some initiatives we feel needs to be safeguarded more profoundly.
Well, at the end of the day, budgeting is a political process, Mr. President. Alam ko naman yun. So, I'm just doing this, katulad doon sinabi ko sa umpisa, this is the duty of the minority to ask questions and to bring out facts, just especially in the interest of transparency. So our people will know, kasi ang ginagastos natin dito would be taxes taken from the people, non-tax revenues also taken from the people, plus loans, debt, national debt incurred in the name of the people. So that's the purpose, Mr. President, just for transparency's sake. So with that I end my interpellation on the BICAM committee report, Mr. President.